back to BLOCKTV. It's time now for Cryptonomics. Now, in the wild west that is the crypto space, we are constantly looking for oracles who can come out to predict the market correctly. While many try, few succeed. Yet, despite high volatility, there are those out there who, through luck, gut instinct, or raw talent, managed to hit right on the money. One such man is Joel Kruger, currency strategist at the LMAX Group, who all the way back in December 2018 managed to predict the end of 2019 price almost exactly on the money. So firstly, Joel, thanks so much for being with us.
Good to be here, Asher.
All right, so to kick us off, let's read through the exact quote you made speaking to Verdict back in December, and it goes something like this. So we'll look for Bitcoin to round out 2019, trading back in the $5,000 to $8,000 region after recovering from lows that may have extended below $2,000 between now and the end of H1 2019. Now, you're a little bit off on the below $2,000 mark, but besides that, the final prediction came out, as Longhash put it in their recent article, as essentially correct. So kudos to you. Fantastic work there. Joel, how did you do it? Give us your magic secret code to getting the number so absolutely correct.
Well, Asher, you know, it's better to be lucky than good, I suppose. But no, the reality is that at the end of 2018, we remember that the market was trading down at around 3,000. 2018 was in many ways, as far as price goes, a tough year. I say price because for network effects at the end of 2017, it was a big success seeing that run up. But you know, we had come off 2018 trading down around 3,000, an area that there was going to be intense demand. And so to look at this market, a market that's young and emerging with the volatility that it had, an expectation that we would see a nice price rise in the year of 2019 was something that we thought was very realistic, and a jump that would take it back about double from where it was at the end of 2018 was making sense. And so to settle in somewhere around 7,000 was something that aligned with various indicators that we look at as well.
Now, but looking across the Longhash list that they put out there, they have a number of the big names across the sphere. Most of those out there predicted incorrectly to the upside. The sort of abundance of over-optimism in the prediction space. You know, we've seen numbers there ranging from across, you know, the sort of 5-digit mark all the way up to, you know, 200,000. You know, distinct, you know, sort of differences and jumps across there, but many over-optimistic. Joel, do you see that as a sort of trend in the space, and why do you think it is that so many analysts out there tend to be overly bullish on the potential outcomes of Bitcoin in the short term?
Well, I think first things first, we have to understand, again, when those analysts were being asked and those projections were being made at the end of 2018, the price was sitting down around $3,000. And so that was setting itself up for some bullish expectations. Now, obviously, some were quite enthusiastic about where they thought things were going to be. But that kind of, I think, takes us into the second point where, you know, people are a little bit talking their books. You know, this is a market that many are invested in and want to see higher. And so you're going to see that optimism towards, you know, what expectations are for the price of Bitcoin.
And certainly, I mean, that's a criticism that comes out from a lot of analysts and traders out there, that so many of these quote-unquote oracles in the space do sort of have, I suppose, the vested interest of being invested in the market themselves, looking to see that price rise in order to boost the value of their own assets. And if you talk about a fact enough, sometimes in financial markets, you can make it true just by virtue of discussing it enough. Do you think that is still symptomatic in a, as you say, still quite immature cryptocurrency trading market?
Well, yes and no. I mean, I'll say that there is an immaturity definitely as far as expectations go from a time horizon perspective. And so while many of these projections have prices going out to, you know, some calling for $100,000, in the short term, that is, I believe, as we've seen, a little bit unrealistic. But longer term, I think that doesn't necessarily sit in conflict with where and what the potential of this market is. I think it's a very realistic possibility, and I think that we'll hear more and more as Bitcoin kind of gains a little bit more around the globe popularity, and we start to see that narrative and that conversation, which I think is a legitimate one with store value compared to gold. I think that long term, when you look at the economics, when you look at the decentralized aspect in a world where central banks of rates are sitting at emergency levels and stock markets are at record highs, it makes sense to me that there's a compelling argument to be made for a decentralized currency that is limited supply. And I'll add that, what is a crazier question? Do you think that Bitcoin is going to exist in 5 years? Or if it does exist, that the price where it's currently at is seemingly quite undervalued for where it should be?
All right, so you've segued us neatly there into the sort of next point of analysis there, Joel, which is you may have been the oracle who got it right once, but if we're to look ahead throughout 2020, I won't prompt you for a number just yet. We might get to that in a moment, but what I would want to ask is trends in terms of 2020. We've already seen the year kick off with some pretty impactful volatility in relation to a lot of what's going on in externalities around the market, namely US-Iran tensions, as we've seen in the first week of the year, which saw Bitcoin move almost in lockstep with gold as a safe haven asset, a narrative that many have been pushing for a long time. Do you think, firstly, that trend will continue, and do you see a potential upside for Bitcoin and for safe havens as a whole?
Again, an interesting conversation that's going on in the ecosystem right now. We have to remember that while Bitcoin does have those store of value attributes, and I believe longer term, it does make a very strong argument to be just as, if not more compelling than gold as an alternative. At the same time, we also have to understand that this is a developing, emerging asset class. And because of that, the risk correlations, when you're talking about something being correlated as a flight to safety asset like gold might be, it's not going to entirely be there shorter term, given the fact that you are looking at an emerging asset class that is somewhat risk correlated. And so if we do see a capitulation that is inevitable in the global equity market, and we see a flight to safety, that could have initially, as people start to try to gain understanding of this new emerging asset class, it could have some flight to safety knock on the price of Bitcoin, despite longer term it being clear that probably a lot of the money should be flowing in that direction. Now, what I will say is in an environment like that, if you're looking at just at the crypto asset class as a whole, and you're comparing, then I would say in that type of an environment, you would expect certainly Bitcoin to outperform relative to something like Ether, which is much more risk correlated given the protocol that is Ethereum.
Certainly, that sort of notion of an uncorrelated asset also plays strongly in terms of the narrative picture around Bitcoin as a whole and crypto markets perhaps more generally. But I would like to ask as well then, in terms of that trend, we've seen a bit of a softening in the retail market, but a potential, although it can be harder to track, sort of redoubling of investment efforts inside the institutional space. Do you think 2020 will be the year in which institutions really start to take Bitcoin that much more seriously?
I think that it's happening and it's continuing to happen, and it will continue to happen. I also think, though, that it's very, very important for people that are certainly in the space to understand that we are getting close to a point where there could be a major capitulation in the global equities market. Mark Carney, the governor of the Bank of England, the outgoing governor, recently said that monetary policy tools are basically used up, and this is something that's become quite evident over a decade after the financial markets crisis. And so when we look at things like that and we consider the fact that this could be on the horizon, it will cause a bit of a shakeup in the institutional world. If we're seeing a market where global equities are capitulating, it will take some of the focus away, some of that friendly focus away from the ecosystem. Having said that, again, there will continue to be demand, and looking past all of it, Bitcoin continues to be very attractive as what the potential that it offers over the longer term.
So, but that's an interesting question right there, Joel, because there would be some out there in the crypto space that say bring on that capitulation in the equities markets, because that will be the opportunity for Bitcoin to really show its credentials, get that flight to safety, safe haven credentials locked into place and really prove itself. There are many out there that are waiting for the next global economic collapse in order to see that narrative play out. How do you foresee that actually playing out in terms of Bitcoin's growth in a market that is capitulating on the equity side?
Yeah, so I do agree that that is the type of scenario that we should see and how Bitcoin should start to behave longer term. At the same time, being realistic and understanding, again, that this is a emerging, developing asset class. When you talk about liquidity and the ins and outs of the market and where it's at, and still a lot of front end application that needs to be developed in this space, it doesn't quite. I think that when you get into a situation where people are second guessing and worrying, and if we get to a state where global equities are falling apart, and you're probably going to see more conservative attitude as far as the big money goes, where gold this time round might even be in a position to outperform. But again, longer term, I do see that correlation existing, in which Bitcoin is certainly a store of value, flight to safety asset. I just think first time round, first big crisis since the inception of Bitcoin, because when Bitcoin came in on October 31st, 2008, we were already in the crisis. So Bitcoin hasn't really had to deal with the crisis, which is another point that people need to understand, that Bitcoin, somewhat ironically and maybe counterintuitively, has benefited from 10 years of monetary policy and government accommodation. So it's had the benefit of the system that it's been rejecting, given the incentive for investors to be putting their money into risky assets.
Certainly, that correlation or uncorrelated element of Bitcoin really could get tested in this year, which brings me to the ultimate question here, Joel. I mean, last year you managed to predict it dead on the money. Stating here from the vantage point of the 9th of January 2020, if I'm sitting at the 31st of December of this same year, what figures am I going to be looking out for?
So my expectation is that we'll continue to see a Bitcoin market that is looking to be very well supported on dips. I think that I'm not going to sit here and make a call on an exact number, because that's a silly game. But my expectation and what we should expect is that this is a market that showed that it was very well supported on dips down towards the 6,000 area. There's a lot of good internal support from 2018 that comes in just under 6,000 in the 5,700 area. And I think that the market is going to start to look to put in this higher low above the 2018 low that was seen down in the 3,000s. And we're starting to put in this major bottom here. And the progression should be to start to look to make its way back up above the next key resistance point, which would be around 10,500, then towards the retest and break of the 2019 high. And I think it is possible, with between all the ins and outs, that the market is in a position to start to make a run back towards that record high, up just ahead of 20,000 from late 2017. And we could see that run in towards the end of the year.
Okay, so if I'm to summarize what you said just down there, I don't want to pin you down on an exact number, as we all agree. That can be a fool's game. But if you were to give me a range, let's say, just a 2-number range, where would you say you think by the December 31st we're looking at for Bitcoin?
Well, let me play into the scenario where it does become clear in that market environment, if we do see a bit of a risk-off environment and people do start to wake up to the fact that Bitcoin is going to be around, and given the economics, it is an attractive asset. I would say that let's look for the market to make a run up into the 15,000 to 20,000 area by the end of the year.
All right, you heard it here first. I look forward to seeing how 2020 plays out. Seems like there could be some volatility on the cards, but certainly an interesting year is ahead of us, no doubt. Joel Kruger, I want to thank you so much for coming to speak with us at BLOCKTV and share your insights on the year that will be. You were right in the year that was. Let's find out how this one pans out. In the meantime, for those at home, stay with us at blocktv.com for all the latest in news and information. I'm Asher Westrop Evans. Thanks for watching.
For more news and updates, follow us on Twitter.